Hello, my name is Jonathan Gomez. Today I'll be talking about the case of Metro Goldwyn Mayer Studios Incorporated versus Grokster Limited. This was decided by the Supreme Court in 2005. This case is an important case for copyright law, especially regarding digital technology and peer-to-peer file sharing. Um, in um, the significance that this has in copyright law is due to the responsibilities of technology developers in today's day and age. With peer-to-peer file sharing taking over, networks like Grokster and Streamcast had the ability to kind of absolve themselves of, or so they thought, of copyright infringement. Um, it created a lot of gray area between what is legal versus what is illegal. Um, the main question was whether companies could be blamed for the encouragement of copyright infringement and basically to see if their technologies actually had a legal use, a significant legal use. The ruling set a standard that impacts technology developers, content creators, and copyright law even now. To understand the case, we need to look at the technology involved. So peer-to-peer file transfers started back in the 1990s, which allowed for people to share files like music, movies, and software from device to device. Before Grokster, the leading file sharing software was Napster. It was the main player, but was eventually shut down. And the reason they were shut down is because they used centralized servers that tracked users' activity, which led to copyright liability. Grokster and Streamcast, on the other hand, they use this decentralized networks that made it hard to monitor the user activity. Copyright holders like MGM claim that these companies knew that they were violating copyright laws and actively helped users share files illegally. The case started in the U.S. District Court for the in the Central District of California. Grokster and Streamcast argued that they shouldn't be held liable under the Sony doctrine, and this stated that companies can't be held responsible if their product has significant legal uses, even if the end users, are using it for illicit activities. The court agreed in favor of the defendants, and this trial would eventually go to the Ninth Court, which upheld the decision, noting that the technology would be used legally and that the companies didn't necessarily control how the users would act or use the software. MGM would take the case to the Supreme Court, claiming that Grokster and Streamcast used their platforms to encourage infringement. The Supreme Court would unanimously reverse the Ninth Court decision and would instead hold Grokster and Streamcast liable under the inducement theory of copyright infringement. Justice Souter identified three key signs here that show that defendants wanted to promote infringement. One of them was targeting Napster users by marketing their software as an alternative for illegal downloading. They didn't implement filtering measures, which the court saw as promoting infringement, and their revenue model heavily relied on maximizing user downloads, which pushed them to promote copyright violations. A lot of these, Streamcast and Grokster were making revenue off of ad space on their software. The case built on the precedent from Sony, Core, and Universal City Studios, which protected companies from liability if the products had a significant lawful use. The Supreme Court kind of expanded on that more by introducing the inducement theory, and this meant that companies would be able to be held liable or responsible if they intentionally promoted copyright infringement, if it could be determined as such. Um, and the ruling clearly indicated that technology developers needed to avoid behaviors that could look like they're encouraging these types of violations, even if the product can be used legally. Even after the ruling by the Supreme Court, there was still a remaining gray area. Um, for example, the term substantial non-infringement use wasn't necessarily clearly defined and created more confusion for the lower courts and developers. The court noted the lack of filtering, but didn't specify what level of filtering would be sufficient. And critics like Lobato argued that Congress should tackle these issues instead of the courts, as lawmakers are more equipped to handle the fast changing technology landscape. These unresolved and hanging questions still affect how courts and companies look at copyright and innovation. And moving on here. This case did have a big impact on tech companies and how they do business. Developers moving forward would need to implement content control systems to avoid aiding in infringement. They need to be careful with the way they market their products so that they don't suggest encouragement of illegal activities. And the precedent from this case would later have an influence on later rulings in cases such as Viacom versus YouTube, which focused on monitoring user generated content. It also encouraged the creation of technologies like the digital rights management to help comply with copyright laws. To conclude here, MGM versus Grokster, it did change the legal landscape of technology and copyright law. It established the inducement theory of liability, and the Supreme Court set new standards for how companies should handle copyright issues. And here you'll see my list of references. And I do thank you so much for your time.